Let's move on to the second big conversation here on the urban debate and the issue of cyber attacks on India, specifically those emanating from countries like China. Now, two international reports in the last 48 hours have suggested that China has attempted to target India's health and India's energy infrastructure. And there seems to be a concerted attempt by groups from China to really breach cyber security in the health sector, in the energy infrastructure, the power structure. Now, let me take you through the details of these two reports. The first one is from cyber intelligence firm Cypherma. And this is a story that's been put out by Reuters that says that Chinese hackers are targeting India's vaccine makers. There's a group called Stone Panda, which is actually responsible for the vulnerabilities, and there are gaps in software of Bharat Biotech and Serum that have been identified. India's vaccine makers, Bharat Biotech, the maker of Covaxin, and Serum Institute, the maker of Covishield, are on the target list. And obviously the intent here of the Chinese hackers is to steal the intellectual property, their very, very, very valuable information on the vaccines that they have, which is proprietary information. The intent seems to be to steal that to gain a competitive advantage over the India pharma companies. Now, this is the first report. There is another one that has emerged now from a US-based cybersecurity group called Recorded Future. And this has also been published in the international news media. Now, this is interesting, viewers, because it actually links Chinese groups to the Mumbai power grid crash that we saw in October 2020 for Mumbai and neighboring regions. And at that point, questions were raised of whether this was a cyber attack. Now, this report says that in the aftermath of the Galwan clash, the India-China clash that happened in the Galwan Valley, there was a campaign initiated by these specific groups from China, and their target was also India's power grid. So essentially, the report then highlights of how Chinese malware was used to infiltrate India's power control systems. And these are very, very technical and advanced hacking techniques that were used. And it was targeted to inject certain malware to cripple India's power grid system. And the target was primarily a network of about 12 organizations. So it's a very technical, detailed report that has come about. It has names and the entire intent and modus operandi. Now, while the Maharashtra government and the centre have different versions of what happened and whether there was indeed a Chinese cyber attack at our power grids, especially linked to the Mumbai power outage, and that debate continues, I want to talk about a larger issue here. Cyber warfare is a real challenge, especially when you're up against countries like China. I want to ask our experts tonight if we, India, are ready to take on such attacks. These are two sectors that normally people wouldn't think about. But these are two sectors very, very critical to a nation's growth, to a nation's progress, and its survival. And to target these could get very, very dangerous. So let's say good evening to those who can shed some more light on this issue. Manu Zacharia, cybersecurity expert, joins us this evening. Puneet Bhasin, and cyber law expert who's with us this evening. Dinesh Bareja, CEO of Open Security Alliance, and Nirmal John, editor for cybersecurity and emerging technologies with ED Prime, joins us this evening. Thank you so much to all of you. Let me start off with Mr. Dinesh Bareja. Mr. Bareja, these are two examples that we've picked up. Before we move on to the larger conversation, would it be fair to say that yes, there are signs that repeated attempts are made by China-backed groups to break through our cybersecurity in various sectors?
Thank you, Tanvi, for having me, and good evening to everybody. The point over here, I would like to say, is that these things don't happen overnight. It takes time to infiltrate. It takes time to go inside and lay low and get activated whenever required. Okay, so it's not something which happened overnight or wherever it is. So whether it's a recorded future report or it's the other report, right? And yes, these things, this is statecraft. It's as old as mankind. And statecraft says that I must spy or I must infiltrate my enemy. And unfortunately, we are surrounded by enemies, and not small ones. There are people who are talking about 1,000 cuts or whatever. Whichever way they get it, they are going to do something to us for sure. It is for us to build our defenses. It is for us to make sure that these things don't come inside. And there are heartening statements from the ministers. So I think we should take it over there and then move on, and look at what can be done further on.
In fact, if I can ask you to for our viewers to understand, if you can just give a few examples of this new kind of warfare that we are staring at, this new challenge that exists. And obviously, it won't just be related to infiltrating government files to get government secrets out. We're looking at examples of our pharma sector and their, private companies and their proprietary information, but it could be anything else. What about aviation when they, if they try to breach security there?
It can be across all what we call critical infrastructure sectors. So that's shipping, that's ports, that's airlines, that's airports, water systems. If you recollect, a few weeks back, there was a report of the water system in the US nearly being poisoned. Okay, and that was again a hack over there. So these are real things which are around us. We can't see them, and how they come in is very simple. It's the equipment which you have, which is running, I would say malicious software, what we call APTs, or let's call it virus in a common man's language. It's a virus which is sitting in some system on some computer, and it is activated whichever way by the adversary. So that is warfare for you. So when we talk about the power sector, and if we have equipment lying all over the country, which is infected and infested, it is for the adversary to activate that malware anytime he or she wants to do it, and plunge us into darkness, or poison our waterways, or bring down our ports, do something like that. This is all part of, I would say, that's what warfare is all about. That's what cyber warfare is all about. You don't see it, nobody dies, but everything dies.
Well, extremely dark statement, but I think it's as real as it gets, what you're saying there. Let me bring in Manu Zacharia in this as well. Manu Zacharia, are we ready? And let's break it down into two parts. Let's talk about the public infrastructure, the government setup, and then the private setup as well, which is equally important in such a scenario.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So let me take you through some of the major attacks that we face, especially from the Chinese side. So as far as what I could collect, in 2009, we started facing this attack. We had the attack on the NIC. And then in 2012, the MEA as well as the MHA websites were down. There was an attack on the Northern Power Grid. And then another major attack on the PMO office as well as the DRDO in 2013. And then you have the,
we seem to have got a technical problem with that line. We're going to try and get Manu back. But since he was giving some, let me also read out a few of the ones that we've actually looked at. And one of them was actually, again, another pharma company that happened last year. And this was Dr. Reddy's lab. Now, Dr. Reddy's lab actually is the pharma company from India, which is conducting trials for the Sputnik vaccine here in our country. And just days after this announcement was made that they've collaborated and the human trials will be conducted in our country as well, this attempt took place. The company at that point of time had said that they've isolated the data center services as a preventive measure from here on. So that's what they had done. Again, obviously, the idea was to steal the proprietary information, which in this case would have been all details related to the Sputnik vaccine and the findings and the research regarding that. Another example that I want to give, and which is what we were running before this, was a year before that, in October 2019, where malware attack was reported at the nuclear power plant. At that point of time, though, the authorities had said that the entire structure and the critical part in the information is actually not connected to any kind of external network or any kind of internet. So all of that is safe. But Nirmal, clearly these are instances that do keep happening repeatedly. Though, is there an example that you can remember where we did see a massive breach?
See, I think there is a need at the moment to reevaluate what is a national security crisis itself, right? Just because there is no collateral damage does not mean that an attack is something that we can wish over. Or, every single instance that you've mentioned, has had some real world impact or the other, right? If in the case of the Mumbai power issue is true, if it's proved, then the fact that hospitals had to rush for emergency replacements of power sources at a time when they could have invested that time in doing what they do best, which is healing people. These are things that come out of it, come out of even the kind of attacks that you've mentioned, which we don't necessarily look at. So, which is why I'm saying I think there is a need to reevaluate what is a national security crisis in the first place. And adjacent to that, right, is the fact that there is a global conversation that's going on cyber norms. In the real world, we know if China attacks, if it crosses the border, we say that it is an attack. How do you define an act of war in the cyberspace? There is a process which is called attribution, where you have to go through forensics data to actually figure out, what is the nature of the attack? Who is behind the attack? It's the whodunit of cybersecurity, essentially. Now, the conversations really need to start at that level. I think, the broader questions can only be answered when we actually have transparency over what happened. And those are the processes, I think, which we need to have in place before we try and answer these bigger questions, frankly.
Yes, actually, you make a very valid point. Let me take that across. In fact, Manu Zacharia is back with us. So, Puneet, before I come to you, I'll just go back to Manu, since we lost his feed halfway through the answer. Go ahead, Manu.
Yeah, so I was listing out a couple of attacks that we faced from the Chinese front. Every year, almost every year, we faced a major attack, and it doesn't look like a random attack. Yeah. Like, these are all well-planned attacks. We had attack on the PMO office, from the MHA to the DRDO. In 2018, interestingly, the CERTAN has come out with a report saying that 35% of the attack Indian infrastructure faced was from China. 2019, from Feb to August, almost 68 lakh of Indian medical records was stolen by a Chinese group called Fallen Sky, I think Fallen Sky 519. That's the group name. So can you assume 68 lakh Indian medical records were already stolen by these people? Okay, so these kind of attacks show that it is not targeting one particular network or one particular industry. It is spread across, all the spectrum. So answering your first question, there is no boundary when it comes to cyberspace. We all are, either today or tomorrow, we are all going to come under attack.
So, today or tomorrow, we're all going to come under attack. The point is, how well are we prepared for it? Puneet Bhasin, do we have an existing framework and a concerted attempt to acknowledge challenges that China and other countries may be throwing at us?
Definitely we do. Now, first thing that I would like to make clear about cyber warfare is that, for example, in a regular warfare, you have a declaration of war, you have a process by which, everybody knows that a war has begun. Whereas when you're talking about cyber warfare, there is no declaration. So technically, almost all nations who have some or the other form of enmity or animosity with the other are constantly sitting on the networks through advanced persistent threats, malware, which is spyware, which is sitting on the systems, and they are like sleeper cells. At any point of time, it's just waiting to literally explode within the computer systems, computer networks of the other nation. So when you're talking about cyber warfare, it's not something that is happening, as what even Dinesh was mentioning, overnight. The warfare is going on continuously. You're realizing it today. That's the big difference. So when it comes to light, you realize, oh, there is cyber warfare that's happening. But cyber warfare, unlike physical warfare, is something which is persistently happening in your systems. Now, when we talk about legal frameworks in India, yes, we do have frameworks which penalize cyber terrorism. Definitely, there are actions that can be taken against these groups which are doing that, and obviously they can be extradited to India with respect to this. But the magnitude that we are talking of cyber warfare is actually very massive. It's not just one organization. It is not just one target, one victim. It's something which is absolutely widespread practically in all our industries today. Like, I'll give you one example. Like, when you're going to talk about medical records, hospitals, which whose databases have been breached, whose securities have been breached, you need to also understand that when you're talking about security breaches, which means a third party can actually manipulate patient data. Now, that absolutely is so risky, and you have no idea how many deaths may have been caused also by manipulation of patient data, their medical history data, their medication data, and today we have no idea about it. So today, would an average patient even realize it? Would a hospital realize it? So we have a legal framework, but if you're going to talk about being able to exactly pinpoint, like for example, for a patient, can he also pinpoint what has happened to him? Let alone the legal framework and the government pinpoint what has happened. That will be more at a macro level. The impact of cyber warfare happens at a micro level, wherein a lot of individuals are not even aware that they are victims of this. In a lot of cases, even the government may not be fully aware that there is such an activity happening. If you would want to consider, let's say the case which you were mentioning of pharma companies. Now, pharma companies are targeted right now is not a fact. They have been on the hit list for years as of now. Almost every other pharma company practically has such a spyware, which again, it may be in the form of Trojans, it may be in the form of any other form of spyware sitting in their systems, constantly observing them. Like any investigator also would be able to affirm and tell you that whenever you're talking about a cyber attack, you're at least looking at a hacker sitting in your system for 2 years plus. He has been there, he knows it, he's looking at what you're doing. It's just that you don't know. That's the way it works. And with respect to intellectual property rights, I'm sure almost everybody in the industry is aware that China is well known with respect to collecting intellectual property rights. So it's not only with respect to pharma, but it's with respect to every industry, and globally they're collecting intellectual property rights. There is a violation of this sort which is happening, and this is not something that is happening today. Our legal framework can cover cyber terrorism on a macro level, where let's say it's against the sovereignty of our country, it's against the fundamental rights of an individual, against a lot of things. But the point is, it needs to be proved. So as I gave you the example of the hospital case, manipulation of patient records or data, it's very difficult for even a victim to realize that they have been victimized in such situations.
So let me ask you for another example. For if in-depth investigation shows and that there has been a concerted, repeated attempt to target India's power grids, and I think that's one of the most disastrous scenarios that we can look at. It can throw an entire bunch of cities or entire region of the nation into absolute chaos. Now, if we have the evidence, what do we do with it, Puneet? Where do we take on the hackers?
Now, definitely, even in the Indian courts, you can prosecute, but it would be difficult. If you're going to talk about a practical aspect, yes, we have cyber terrorism outlined in the Information Technology Act. Even in the Indian Penal Code, these offenses are there. But it would involve extradition of the parties who have committed this offense. And obviously, a nation which is your enemy nation is not going to easily extradite the criminals to you for any form of prosecution. So where it ends up actually then is international law, where you need to approach the International Court of Justice. You need to approach a third-party body of this nature under the United Nations who can take up this matter, and thereafter the nation, which is obviously your hostile nation, is forced to take action or extradite the culprits to you. Because definitely if a nation is not on good terms with you, they're not going to comply with your request just the way you mention it to them.
Okay, fair enough. The point that you make, and let's dwell on this a little bit more, because Mr. Dinesh Bareja, at the end of the day, right now there may be varied reports coming in on whether or not it was genuinely a cyber attack that caused the Mumbai power outage. But even if we do manage to find that out, what can be done apart from maybe ensuring that we have stronger barriers next time?
A little bit of bright sunshine for you and for the viewers, for everybody listening on. Forget about, whatever we are talking about, Puneet or Manu, all of us, is reactive. It's happened. You cannot do anything about it. The horse is bolted, so close the gate. Unfortunately, we've not been closing the gates also. In spite of whatever been happening over the last few years, I've been in this business for the last 15 years. And there have been so many horses who have run out, and not a single gate has been bolted. Or if it's been bolted, it's like, just a small shingle over there. Any kid can push it through. So let's talk about Mumbai. Right now, as I sit over here, I do know that good work has been done post that incident. Firstly, that incident, that recorded future, or all the whole media sort of saying that it is recorded future says that so-and-so happened because, and that's why Mumbai happened. Even the report says it was not so. The report links it only by virtue of the statement made by the minister on the 13th, in November, the first week of November, by the minister saying that it was a cyber sabotage. And that's what they say, that because the minister said it, so this could be so. Okay, it's not a statement of fact in any case. In any way, like Puneet said, attribution, and even Manu and others said, attribution is difficult. You can't say it was China or it was X or it was Z. Yes, there is evidence to the contrary. Fair enough. We accept that evidence and let's move and close the gate so it doesn't happen again. Okay. And the good news I wanted to just share with you guys was that the Western region power grid sort of have been mapped by some people whom I know, and the work is still ongoing. It's not done. It's not that it's done, but what they have is sort of what we call a sort of a dynamic model, which sees or which has mapped the load, the LDCs as well as the devices and all, and can trigger an alarm. Now, this is something which should have been done many years back. There are 3 certs working in the power ministry. There is a CEA, there is a CERC, and we only talk about NCIPC and CERT. Okay, but these 2 organizations, CERT and NCIPC, they do not have power to enforce. Let us remember that. They provide advisories and guidance. It ends over there. They cannot come and arm twist the power sector or the power or the LDC anywhere in the country and say, do it. Small evidence seen in the last few days. Maharashtra Home Minister says this happened because of that report which they have. Okay, there is a cyber sabotage. And today, there is R.K. Singh, Honorable R.K. Singh, Union Minister, who says nothing happened. And this is what you said in the beginning of your talk also. So we have one minister saying happened, one minister saying not happened. And we talk about, sharing information across the country and working as one against any threat. So when a threat is not visible, what do we do? And after sharing this, bright spot that some good people have got together and done this, which is the first time in the country. Let me tell you that also. And maybe in some time they'll make an announcement in stealth mode right now. And it's for public. It's not a private entity. It's a public entity. It will be out in the public itself, and it will be available to the government. Okay. But I would just like to, spend a few minutes, say a minute or two, and scare things much more and make things more scarier.
No, that's fine. We need to be aware of the reality.
So let's forget about, power grid and all that. Let's talk about information influencing.
Yeah.
You don't know how long it's been happening. For the last 4 years or more, I follow India maps. Okay, somebody who puts up a wrong India map, I go behind that guy and I try to get that by a person to apologize. Maybe successful be me and a group of about 30, 40 people, friends of mine. We've been able to get a few international companies to say sorry and stuff like that. And so if today you go and find a map on Google, what happens? You get a map which is truncated. It does not show Kashmir. It does not show Ladakh as yours. Okay, whereas it should be there. And imagine these maps have gone into school books. So your generation is going to grow up thinking that does not belong to you. Another generation is going to grow up thinking that Arunachal Pradesh doesn't belong to you. That is information influencing. Okay, you're going to get, we talk about Twitter and whatever. Mm-hmm. So what's going to happen when you have a deep fake working and you have, say, our honorable PM saying something bad about some lady PM in some other country, and it goes viral. How far can you go to try and catch that guy? You're not going. There's going to be no attribution, and like Prince said, you can't find that person. It is even, we would spend days and hours, and we are not able to get Nirav Modi back. Come on, so let's be real. Okay, you can't get Nirav Modi, you can't get Malaya back over here.
Right. So now I understand that the point that you're making, Dinesh, and a very valid point, and it brings us back to the aspect that we need to then ensure that our systems are stronger, our security system is stronger, and we're able to react to it maybe differently. For example, Manu, for me personally, it's a bit scary to see the way.
Sorry, one minute. Not just our systems. I'm sorry, not just our systems, ma'am. Our purchases. We sort of, we have that death wish here. We are going and buying equipment from wherever we want to buy, and we do not worry about the provenance of the equipment. We are still buying Chinese equipment. We are still buying American equipment. We are still buying foreign equipment and putting it in sensitive areas. We've got people in this country who are making that hardware. We do not support them.
Okay. I got the point. Yes, okay, a very valid point. When you bring in these hardware systems, it can also come pre-programmed with spyware, which will then lead to a bigger issue, which has happened. That controversy has been happened. We've been debated. Mr. Dinesh, allow me to just go across to our other panelists as well.
Sure.
And Manu, so here is what scares me, that if indeed there was somebody, a Chinese group, behind the power grid outage, from October to February, we've not heard anything on it. Now we've got two governments playing perhaps politics on it, or the center doesn't want to openly admit that there is a Chinese role here, or whatever it is. But that's scary. If we don't take it seriously, if we underplay it to this extent, then what happens tomorrow if there's a bigger outage?
Yeah, so that's what I've been, highlighting since the beginning, that it is going to happen. It is going to continue. We are going to have systems that will evolve and it will detect this. Some of the attacks that we face, they will be blocked. Some of them will bypass our defense mechanism. But at least we should have a reactive mechanism that, immediately identifies if there is an attack. It shouldn't happen that we wait for a foreign country to come out with a report and then we start debating like this. No, see, all attacks we may not be able to stop. Some of them might bypass. If it is able to bypass, at least we should be able to detect it within 1 or 2 days. Come out with a statement, okay, there was a successful attack, but we stopped it, we took this action. So that improvement has to happen in our system is the first point. And this can happen only if we look at what mistakes we did earlier. So a very detailed study on what mistakes happened, how we can fix it, those kind of approaches or a framework has to evolve, which has to be continuously monitored. Otherwise, this keeps happening and we keep debating like this.
Okay, so let's talk about this. Give me another example. For one thing that, Dinesh said is be careful about the systems that you're buying and bringing in and using. How else do we, protect ourselves more or make it a faster reactive system?
Okay, so since the agenda for today's discussion is more on the cyber warfare front, let me ask a question like all of us are aware of the keyword called cyber warfare doctrine. Okay, from an Indian perspective, is there any doctrine publicly available talking about India's cyber offensive capability? Yes, it is there in the defense. These are top secret documents. Let's not talk about the top secret documents, but from a public perspective, do we have a doctrine like that? But many other countries, they do have. So point number one is there a public doctrine like that? Second is we all know that US, they cannot sell some of their offensive or security products to certain countries where there are sanctions going on. For example, Iran and all those things. What about India? What about the brain drain that is happening? We have good cyber security skills, but is there a control on the brain drain that is happening? Probably, some of our enemy countries are taking our knowledge through some other channel, and we are not doing anything like that. There are so many examples that we can quote, which, as we started the discussion, saying this is not something that happens in one day.
Yeah.
All the enemy countries, they have a long-term plan. They have a 10 to 20 years plan where they approach all these things. If you look at the power grid attack, how do I see it is like on the eastern sector when there was the Galvan Valley, the confrontation was happening. If you remember, there was a email phishing campaign by the Chinese people, and there was a discussion on Mirror Now. I was part of it, and there was a DDoS attack happening on the Indian infrastructure. I see all these as the decoys to try to, take our attention to these small attacks, wherein we were concentrating on the small attacks, but the Chinese were actually, I think, they were trying to infiltrate into the power systems. These all things are possible. We can only, authoritatively answer it once we link all the evidences or the dots. So there are a lot of examples that we can always quote.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Nirmal, is there also a need to perhaps, set up more institutions and groups and have a more coordinated communication between these various entities?
So at the moment, there has been a conversation around creation of a national cybersecurity strategy. Now, this has been since, I think, March of 2019, when the new cybersecurity coordinator took office. He has been talking about creating the new cybersecurity strategy. Now, we have not seen it yet. We have not seen it after 2 years. The question to ask is, where is it, right? I think some of these big questions that my fellow panelists have raised should find an answer there. How do you coordinate the different aspects of agencies? What is your posture on bringing out and being more transparent about some of these conversations? And what should be your reaction? I disagree with a couple of my fellow panelists when they say that there are no other options. I think naming and shaming itself is an option. It is an option that multiple countries have taken before. Countries like the United Kingdom, for example, had a similar attack a few months back, which it attributed. This was an attack on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine development, which is attributed to the Chinese. Now, is there a effect which is coming out of it, out of naming and shaming? Perhaps not. But I think bringing these conversations into the international community is paramount. It is important because there is a global conversation around cyber norms, developing cyber norms that is happening currently under the aegis of the United Nations, right? You need to be part of these conversations. We need to, in India, we need to take a more proactive role to be part of these conversations. Also, just to highlight to a great example, which I thought, which I've highlighted in multiple other forums, is the Sing Health hack of 2018. The Singapore Health Services, their database was hacked, and about a year later, they came out with a comprehensive report. And they put it out. They tabled it in the Singapore Parliament. There were takeaways for how to react to these situations. What can the rest of the government framework and private companies learn from the mistakes that led to the Sing Health hack? Information sharing is at the core of any sort of defensive posture that you're going to have to take. Currently, without a national cybersecurity strategy, we don't have much of an option.
Okay, I'm a little short on time, but I do want to hear if, Puneet, if you want to add, especially to what Nirmal was saying here as a, as a collective effort that we need to take on an international level as well.
Definitely. On an international level, there is a lot of effort that is needed. But instead of going in all those directions and trying to get all the nations on the same plane, in India itself, see, I'll just to give an understanding to the viewers who may not be aware how these breaches happen, you may have investments of thousands of crores on cybersecurity, and that doesn't guarantee that you will not be breached. So if you know the JP Morgan case, as much of investment, but if you are subject to an advanced persistent threat, you may succumb. So the only way you can actually safeguard yourself as a nation is having a very strong data protection policy, for which again it's very important the data protection bill gets enacted, where there are good standards of encryption, good standards of data, you could say coding, which in simple words I would say, wherein a lot of data is rendered useless to a hacker in the event he is not able to really get the keys to start viewing the data. Even encrypted data, it takes some of the encryptions take years for data to actually get recovered. So you buy these methods where if it is mandated for, let's say, not just the government, but for private organizations, let's consider banks, hospitals, every single entity, if it is mandated for them when they're dealing with sensitive data to start incorporating these standards. Now, the only way this is going to happen, like we've been using the internet in India over years now, and companies never really invest money into cybersecurity or proactive, you could say, cyber law compliance. The reason is it's never mandated compulsory. So if the Data Protection Act comes into being, that is the only way you can force people to start complying, and that will ensure that the data is rendered useless even if any hacker gains access to it. There's one thing, Tanvi, I would like to actually bring up, that when we are talking about cyber warfare, one of the biggest forms of cyber warfare that is happening is related to fake news, where a lot of fake news which is generated is actually emanating from countries which have some of the animosity towards India. And this form of fake news, the entire agenda normally is to agonize people, antagonize people, and to develop a lot of hatred towards their own government, towards some other community in their own nation, and create a very negative polarized atmosphere within the same country. And one of the good things that has happened is, I'm sure almost even the viewers would be aware, even the panelists, that the intermediary guidelines have been amended on 25th of February 2021 to include digital platforms, intermediaries, social media platforms. So a lot of them now have to be able to provide the actual data of who is the originator of the message in the case of any such offense happening. So that's a very positive step. So when we're talking about all the things that are not there, I think it's very important to highlight the positive step that has been taken by the government by enacting this in an emergency.
Yes, well, I would definitely like to see, I agree with you, and I think, we did have conversations about it the day it was announced as well. I would definitely like to see it being positively and constructively used as well. So yes, the guidelines are here. Let's see how they get used. A big thank you to all four of our panelists. I think this has been an extremely enlightening conversation about the reality of cyber warfare and the fact that yes, while India has done a bit, there is so much more that needs to be done, and it's not a single vertical, it's not a single government, single organization that has to look at it. Across the segments, from private to public, from health to power to infrastructure to IT, across segments, we have to ensure that one, we have a clear framework, stricter set of laws. We are careful about where we're getting our technology from, where we're getting our hardware from, how much of the Chinese have a role to play in what we're setting up in our country. And when there are such breaches, because there will always be breaches, these guys are always 10 steps ahead of the security people. When there are breaches, we are able to react quickly to it. We are able to clamp it down, to shut it down with minimum damage. We are able to learn from that and then change our systems accordingly. And I think companies and governments, everybody needs to together start taking this extremely seriously. It cannot boil down to simply a political fight between the Maharashtra government and the central government to say, oh, was it a Chinese cyber attack or was it not? Think about it. Thank you for joining us on this conversation.